10 years after civilization collapsed in a single day, the world has become a graveyard. No crops grow, no animals roam, and clean water is a luxury few can afford. In this hellish landscape, humans have become the ultimate predators. Cannibalism isn't just survival, it's the new normal. John lives deep in the jungle with his father and critically injured wife, whose life depends on a dwindling supply of antibiotics. When a pack of flesh-eating cannibals attacks their home, kills his father, and steals their medical supplies, John faces an impossible choice: venture into the wilderness alone to track down these human monsters, or watch the woman he loves die. Armed with nothing but makeshift weapons and burning rage, he must infiltrate the cannibals' camp and reclaim what was stolen. Deep in the jungle, far from the remnants of civilization, he lived with his father and wife in a carefully concealed shelter. Their home was camouflaged with logs and branches, nearly invisible to any potential threats that might wander through the forest. In this new world, invisibility meant survival. The trio spent their days hunting for whatever scarce food they could find. On this particular day, John and his father had ventured into the forest with a handmade bow, tracking a wild boar. The father took careful aim and managed to wound the animal, but it escaped into the dense undergrowth. They followed the trail of blood through the forest, hoping to recover their prey, but lost the trail near a swamp where the boar had likely drowned. With nothing to show for their effort, they were forced to return home hungry and disappointed. During their return journey, they discovered something unusual: fresh tire tracks leading to 2 abandoned vehicles. In this dead world, any sign of recent human activity was both promising and dangerous. They approached cautiously, and John climbed into one of the cars where he made a remarkable discovery: a packet of biscuits. In a world where processed food was more valuable than gold, this was an incredible find. Overcome by hunger, John began eating the biscuits immediately, not sharing the discovery with his father. It was a small act of selfishness, but in a world of scarcity, even the most well-intentioned people could make desperate choices. Unfortunately, while eating, John accidentally leaned against the car's horn. The loud noise echoed through the silent forest, a sound that carried far in the dead stillness of this new world. The consequences were immediate. A pack of wild dogs, drawn by the noise, came running toward their location. John and his father quickly hid inside the car as the animals sniffed around, growling and circling the vehicle. The dogs eventually moved on, but the incident served as a stark reminder of how dangerous even the smallest mistake could be in this hostile environment. Back at their shelter, the full scope of their dire situation became clear. John's wife lay inside their hidden refuge, seriously injured with a severe wound on her back. The injury was infected, and without proper medical treatment, she wouldn't survive much longer. Fortunately, they possessed a few precious antibiotics. 1 pill per day was keeping her condition stable, but their supply was running dangerously low. In the old world, a simple course of antibiotics would have been routine medical care. In the post-apocalyptic wasteland, however, proper nutrition and medicine were luxuries that most survivors could only dream of. The contrast between the technological solutions available in the past and their current desperate circumstances couldn't have been starker. The woman's condition was deteriorating despite the medication. She suffered from high fever that often left her unconscious, and the infection showed signs of worsening. John and his father both knew that without a steady supply of antibiotics, she would die within days. This knowledge weighed heavily on all of them, creating an atmosphere of desperate urgency in their small shelter. Their routine was simple but essential. John's father would step outside periodically to keep watch, sometimes smoking to calm his nerves. John would tend to his wife, ensuring she had water to drink and monitoring her condition. They lived each day knowing it could be their last together, but they held on to hope that somehow they could find more medicine or that her body would fight off the infection naturally. One morning, their worst fears materialized. John's father had stepped outside for his usual watch when he heard strange noises approaching through the forest. When John went to investigate, he was horrified to see a group of dangerous men advancing toward their shelter. These weren't ordinary survivors, they were cannibals, human hunters who had given up any pretense of civilization. John instantly recognized the threat and rushed back to warn his father. Without wasting precious seconds, both men quickly packed their most essential belongings, including the irreplaceable medicine. They had always known this moment might come, and their escape plan was simple but desperate. Hide John and his wife underground while his father drew the attackers away. John's father understood the mathematics of their situation. His daughter-in-law was too weak to run, and attempting to flee as a group would result in all 3 being captured. The only chance for John and his wife to survive was for him to make the ultimate sacrifice. He concealed them in a makeshift pit beneath their shelter, a dirty, cramped hiding place that would hopefully keep them safe. Armed with only a makeshift weapon that resembled a rod, John's father positioned himself to face the approaching cannibals. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, he fought with the desperation of a man protecting his family. He managed to wound and kill 3 or 4 of the attackers, displaying remarkable courage and skill. But the odds were impossible. There were simply too many enemies, and they were too ruthless. The cannibals overwhelmed John's father through sheer numbers. They attacked him from all sides simultaneously, brutally ending his life. From their hiding place in the pit, John and his wife witnessed the entire horrific scene. They watched helplessly as the man who had sacrificed everything to protect them was murdered before their eyes. Tears streamed down their faces as they felt utterly powerless to intervene or help. The cannibals' brutality didn't end with murder. They systematically looted everything of value from the shelter, but most catastrophically, they seized the bag containing John's wife's medicine. This wasn't mere theft, it was a death sentence. Without those antibiotics, the infection ravaging her body would quickly become fatal. Even more disturbing was how the cannibals treated John's father's corpse. Rather than leaving his body where it fell, they carried it away on sticks like a hunted animal, treating the remains as nothing more than future meat. This casual desecration revealed the complete absence of humanity in these predators. They no longer saw other people as fellow human beings, but simply as food sources to be harvested. When John and his wife finally emerged from their hiding place, they found their home completely destroyed. The cannibals had ransacked everything, leaving behind only wreckage and devastation. John's anxiety reached new heights when he saw that his wife's condition had worsened significantly during the attack. The stress, combined with her existing infection, had caused her fever to spike dramatically. She had lost consciousness entirely, her body burning with heat as the infection spread unchecked. Standing in the ruins of their former life, John faced a moment of complete despair. His father was dead, his home was destroyed, his wife was dying, and the medicine that could save her was in the hands of the murderers who had destroyed everything he loved. The logical response would have been to surrender to hopelessness, but John's love for his wife and desire for justice burned stronger than his despair. Despite the overwhelming odds against him, John made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He would track down the cannibals and recover the stolen medicine. It was a mission that bordered on suicide, but the alternative, watching his wife die slowly from infection, was unacceptable. First, he needed to ensure his wife's safety during his absence. He gathered firewood and made emergency repairs to their damaged shelter, creating a secure space where she could rest. He left her with what little water they had remaining and made sure she was as comfortable as possible given their circumstances. Most importantly, he locked the door from the outside to prevent any predators, human or animal, from entering while she was unconscious and defenseless. John set out on his mission with virtually nothing. The cannibals had stolen all their warm clothing, leaving him with only a t-shirt and shorts as winter approached. The cold was brutal, making him shiver uncontrollably as he moved through the freezing forest. His body was already weakened from lack of food and water, and the emotional trauma of losing his father had taken its toll. Every step was a struggle, but he forced himself to continue forward. Following the cannibals' trail through the wilderness, John's physical condition deteriorated rapidly. The combination of cold, hunger, exhaustion, and grief pushed his body beyond its limits. Eventually, he collapsed to the ground, his strength completely depleted. For a moment, it seemed he might give up entirely, lying in the dirt as darkness closed in around him. Just as he was about to surrender to despair, something extraordinary happened. A small child appeared before him, the first other innocent person he had encountered in this wasteland. Seeing the child's face gave John a glimmer of hope that somehow inspired him to find the strength to rise once more. With renewed determination, he struggled to his feet and began following the child. The child, frightened by John's desperate appearance, fled as soon as he noticed he was being followed. John pursued him through the forest, driven by a combination of curiosity and desperate need for any form of human connection that wasn't murderous. The child's home was nearby, a small cabin where he lived with an elderly man, possibly his grandfather. When the child burst through the door and slammed it shut behind him, John used his remaining strength to force his way inside. He found the child and old man huddled together, both shivering from cold and terrified by his sudden intrusion. In this world where humans had become predators, any stranger at the door could represent death. However, John had no intention of harming these innocent survivors. His only goal was acquiring warm clothing that might help him survive the winter conditions long enough to complete his mission. Without speaking, perhaps unable to find words for his grief and determination, he quietly gathered the old man's jacket and a pair of shoes that were lying nearby. This wasn't theft in any traditional sense, it was pure survival instinct. John took only what he needed and left the child and old man completely unharmed. He disappeared back into the dark forest, now slightly better equipped to face the harsh conditions ahead. The encounter had also shown him that not all humans had descended into cannibalism. There were still innocent people trying to survive with their humanity intact. John continued following the cannibals' trail deeper into the wilderness. As he tracked them, he began finding disturbing evidence of their presence: blood trails and the remnants of fires still smoldering in the cold air. These signs led him to a devastating discovery that would haunt him forever. Scattered across the ground were bones, cracked, broken, and completely stripped of flesh. Among them, John recognized his father's skull. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The cannibals hadn't just killed his father, they had consumed his body entirely. What remained were just bones and scattered fragments, the final evidence of how far humanity had fallen in this dead world. The sight completely shattered John emotionally. This wasn't just murder, it was the complete desecration of everything his father had been. The man who had sacrificed his life to save John and his wife had been reduced to nothing more than a meal for these monsters. Despite his overwhelming grief, John forced himself to gather what remained of his father's bones and bury them properly, giving the man who had died protecting his family whatever dignity he could provide. This discovery transformed John's mission from rescue to revenge. The cannibals had taken everything from him: his father's life, his home, his wife's medicine, and even his father's bodily remains. The rage that burned within him was no longer just about saving his wife, it was about bringing justice to the monsters who had destroyed his family and defiled his father's memory. With his father's bones properly buried and his resolve hardened into steel, John continued his pursuit. He spotted smoke rising in the distance, a clear sign that the cannibals were nearby. To get a better view of their location, he climbed a tall tree to scout the area. His strategy worked, he could clearly see the source of the smoke and plan his approach. Unfortunately, his reconnaissance mission nearly ended in disaster. As he maneuvered among the tree branches for a better vantage point, a branch broke under his weight. John fell from a significant height, crashing to the forest floor with tremendous impact. The fall severely injured his leg, opening a deep wound that immediately began bleeding. The sound of his fall created a new danger. In this dead world, wild dogs roamed in packs, scavenging for any source of food. The noise attracted their attention, and John soon heard the sound of multiple dogs barking as they approached his location. With his leg badly injured, running was impossible. He was forced to crawl through the undergrowth, dragging his wounded body as the pack grew closer. As night fell, the threat from the wild dogs intensified. John realized he needed to find a way to protect himself without the ability to flee. Drawing on survival instincts, he gathered whatever wood he could find and built a fire. Using a piece of burning wood as a torch, he faced down the approaching pack. The dogs, naturally afraid of fire, were forced to retreat rather than attack. This clever use of their primal fears saved John's life, though he was left wounded, exhausted, and alone in the wilderness. The next morning, with the dogs gone, John resumed his pursuit despite his injuries. As he limped through the forest, he noticed something disturbing: blood flowing in a nearby stream. Following the source of the contamination, he discovered a woman washing a blood-stained knife in the water. She was clearly one of the cannibals, and her presence indicated their camp was nearby. Rather than confronting her directly, John chose to observe from hiding. When the woman finished her grisly task and returned to wherever she had come from, John carefully followed her, using stealth to avoid detection. This surveillance led him straight to the cannibals' hideout, an old trailer hidden deep in the woods that served as their base of operations. John watched the camp carefully, assessing the situation. At the moment, only the woman appeared to be present, which gave him a perfect opportunity to infiltrate their lair and search for the stolen medicine. He approached the trailer cautiously, noting the crude but functional setup the cannibals had created for themselves. As he prepared to enter the trailer, John noticed something important: bells connected to wires around the perimeter. These served as an alarm system to alert the cannibals if anyone approached their hideout. Understanding this security measure, John moved with extreme care to avoid triggering the warning system. Inside the trailer, John immediately spotted his stolen bag lying among the cannibals' supplies. His heart raced with hope as he quickly opened it to retrieve the precious medicine. However, his excitement turned to horror when he discovered the bag was empty. All the antibiotics had been removed. The medicine his wife desperately needed was somewhere else in the camp. John frantically began searching through cabinets and storage areas within the trailer, looking for any sign of the life-saving medication. He was so focused on his desperate search that he failed to notice the woman had returned from her tasks outside. She spotted the intruder in their hideout and immediately moved to attack. A brutal, silent fight erupted between them. Though John was weakened by days without food or proper rest, his desperation gave him strength. The woman was vicious and determined to protect her territory, but John's rage over his father's death and his wife's condition drove him to fight with savage intensity. During the struggle, John managed to grab a heavy stone and struck the woman in the head with devastating force. The blow was fatal. Blood poured from her skull as she collapsed to the ground. She didn't move again. John had committed his first murder, but in this world, it was simply another aspect of survival. Knowing that the other cannibals would return soon, John quickly dragged the woman's body away from the trailer to avoid immediate detection. He concealed the corpse behind trees and covered it with leaves, hoping to delay discovery for as long as possible. Then he hid himself nearby and waited to see what would happen when the rest of the group returned. When the cannibals came back to their camp, John witnessed something that filled him with both rage and determination. They had captured the same innocent child he had encountered earlier, the boy who lived with the old man in the cabin. The cannibals had tied the child up and were clearly planning to make him their next victim. The cannibals' leader, an old man with cunning intelligence, quickly noticed something was wrong. Supplies were disturbed, the trailer felt different, and most importantly, the woman was nowhere to be found. He immediately put the group on high alert and began searching the area systematically. John remained hidden as the cannibals left to hunt for the missing woman and any potential intruders. Only one man stayed behind, an injured cannibal who was too weak to participate in the search. This gave John the opportunity he needed to attempt a rescue of the captured child. Moving with extreme stealth, John entered the camp and began working to free the tied-up boy. However, when the child saw him approaching, the boy began screaming in terror. Having lived in this world where strangers meant danger, the child assumed John was another threat. John tried to calm the boy while quickly working to untie the ropes, but the child's cries were attracting attention. The noise alerted the injured cannibal inside the trailer, who began moving to investigate. John managed to free the child and help him escape just as the rest of the cannibals started returning to the camp. The boy's rescue was successful, but now John was trapped in hostile territory with enemies closing in from all sides. Taking advantage of the confusion, John hid himself and waited for the right moment to continue his mission. During his surveillance, he spotted a locked wooden box that he suspected contained the medicine. However, he also noticed that the key to the box hung around the neck of the cannibals' leader. The cannibals eventually found their female companion's corpse and realized they were dealing with a dangerous intruder. In their rage, they built a fire and burned her body while increasing their security measures. John watched this grisly ritual from his hiding place, knowing that his presence had been discovered and that the stakes had escalated dramatically. John spent the entire night lying motionless in his hiding spot, waiting for the cannibals to let their guard down. As dawn approached and the group finally fell asleep from exhaustion, he saw his chance. Moving with the stealth of a predator, John crept into the camp where the cannibals lay sleeping around the dying embers of their fire. The most dangerous part of his mission was approaching the leader while he slept. John had to get close enough to remove the key from around the man's neck without waking him or alerting the others. With hands shaking from both fear and adrenaline, John carefully reached for the key and slowly unclasped it from the chain. Once he had the key, John quietly moved to the locked box and opened it. His instincts had been correct. Inside were various medical supplies, including the specific antibiotics his wife needed to survive. Rather than taking everything, John made the careful decision to take only the medicine he recognized, hoping this would delay the discovery of the theft. John locked the box again and began his escape from the camp. However, in his haste to leave with the precious medicine, he made a critical error. As he stepped away from the trailer, he accidentally triggered one of the wire alarm systems he had noticed earlier. A bell rang loudly through the quiet morning air, instantly alerting every cannibal in the camp. The leader's eyes snapped open immediately, and within seconds the entire group was awake and moving. John ran as fast as his injured leg would allow, clutching the medicine that represented his wife's only chance of survival. Behind him, he could hear the cannibals organizing their pursuit, and he knew they would show no mercy if they caught him. Despite his best efforts to escape, John's weakened condition and injured leg made it impossible to outrun his pursuers. The cannibals caught up with him in the forest and captured him with brutal efficiency. They stripped off his warm clothes, leaving him vulnerable to the cold, and tied him securely to the ground. The cannibals began building a fire nearby, and their intentions became horrifyingly clear. They were preparing to cook and eat John just as they had done to his father. This was to be his punishment for infiltrating their camp and killing their companion. John faced the same fate that had befallen so many other victims of these human predators. In his desperate situation, John spotted something nearby that offered a slim hope of salvation: the whistle he had taken from the abandoned tent earlier in his journey. Stretching as far as his bonds would allow, he managed to grab the whistle and blow it with all the strength he could muster. The loud, piercing sound echoed through the forest and had exactly the effect John had hoped for. In the distance, wild dogs heard the noise and began responding with howls and barks. The sound of the approaching pack filled the cannibals with panic. They knew these animals were dangerous and unpredictable. As the dogs grew closer, the cannibal leader made a desperate and ruthless decision. To save himself and provide a distraction for the pack, he deliberately injured one of his own companions and threw the wounded man to the ground as bait. The wild dogs immediately attacked the sacrificial victim, giving the leader and his remaining followers a chance to escape. John used the chaos created by the dog attack to cut through his restraints with a knife he had hidden. He quickly retrieved his warm clothes and fled the scene while the dogs were occupied with their victim. The whistle strategy had worked perfectly, saving his life and eliminating several of his enemies in the process. However, the cannibal leader was far from finished. Having survived the dog attack through his ruthless sacrifice of his own man, he began tracking John through the forest. The leader was cunning, patient, and absolutely determined to kill the man who had destroyed his group and stolen from his camp. John, exhausted from his ordeal and focused entirely on returning home with the medicine, was unaware that he was being stalked. When he stopped to rest against a tree, the leader struck from behind, kicking him violently and sending him sprawling across the ground. The final confrontation between predator and prey had begun. What followed was a brutal fight between two men who had nothing left to lose. John fought with the desperation of someone trying to save the woman he loved, while the leader battled with the rage of someone who had lost everything to this intruder. They were equally matched in their determination and willingness to kill. During the battle, John managed to wound the leader with an arrow to the leg, causing him to fall. As John approached to finish him off, his bowstring snapped at the critical moment, leaving both men to face each other with knives. Just as they prepared for their final deadly confrontation, the sound of approaching wild dogs filled the air once again. Both men fled in different directions, but the leader's leg wound made it impossible for him to run effectively. The wild dogs caught up with him and tore him apart, finally ending the threat he represented. John's revenge was complete. Every cannibal who had attacked his family was now dead, and he had recovered the medicine that could save his wife's life. With the cannibals eliminated and the precious antibiotics in his possession, John began the long journey back to his hidden shelter. The trek was arduous, made more difficult by his injuries and exhaustion, but he was driven by the knowledge that his wife's life hung in the balance. Every hour that passed meant her infection was growing worse. Along the way, John made a stop that revealed his underlying humanity despite everything he had endured. He returned to the cabin where the child and old man lived, the same people from whom he had taken warm clothes earlier. Rather than simply passing by, John quietly left several cans of food outside their door. It was a small act of kindness in a world that had become starved of compassion, a sign that his experiences hadn't completely destroyed his capacity for caring about innocent people. As John finally approached his home after days of horror and violence, he was filled with both hope and anxiety. He had accomplished the impossible, tracked down a group of dangerous cannibals, infiltrated their camp, retrieved the stolen medicine, and survived multiple life-threatening encounters. But his success would mean nothing if he had returned too late to save his wife. When John reached his shelter, his heart sank with dread. The door was standing open, and there was no sign of his wife anywhere inside. The cabin appeared empty and undisturbed, but she was simply gone. After everything he had sacrificed and endured, it seemed he might have arrived too late. John collapsed to the floor in despair, overwhelmed by the possibility that his wife had died while he was away or had fallen victim to wild animals or other dangers. The thought that his heroic mission might have been futile was almost too much to bear. He had lost his father, killed multiple people, and risked everything, only to potentially lose the person he had fought so hard to save. As John sat in the empty cabin, consumed by grief and exhaustion, he felt a gentle hand touch his shoulder from behind.